Carol, I'm going to head and hop out and watch the broadcast. If there's any issues, you can ping me or Sam.
Thank you.
Sam, you're going to stay. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Before we get started this afternoon, School Board Member Erica Whitfield has asked for a point of personal privilege. Mrs. Whitfield.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I wanted to take this moment of personal privilege to apologize for my inadvertent wording I used in my comments last week. My word choice does not remotely represent how I feel. I believe schools are the most valuable organization in the county because our teachers are so wonderful. It has been my honor to work with you and send my daughter to learn in your classrooms. I appreciate the board giving me a moment to apologize, and I look forward to continuing to show the appreciation I truly feel for all our staff members through my statements and my actions, especially through the difficult decisions that we face in the next couple of months. Thank you very much.
You're welcome, Mrs. Whitfield. Today, the board will participate in two meetings, a workshop where the results of recent surveys will be shared, and a special meeting. Both will be conducted using Google Meet technology for board members and staff who are participating live. Viewers and listeners can access the meetings today by either watching on Comcast channel 235 or by using the YouTube link on our webpage at palmbeachschools.org. We also offer a listening only option which the public can access by calling 561-357-5900 or toll free at 1-866-930-7015. Meeting ID is 1-561-880-1124 #. I now call the workshop to order. Mrs. Bass, will you please call the roll?
Yes, District 1, Barbara McQuinn.
Here.
District 2, Chuck Shaw.
Here.
District 3, Karen Brill.
Here.
District 4, Erica Whitfield.
Here.
District 5, Frank Barbieri.
Here.
District 6, Mark Andrews.
Here.
District 7, Deborah Robinson.
Here.
All right, we have all 7 board members present. Also present on the virtual dais for Superintendent Dr. Donald Fenoy, General Counsel Julie Enrico, Clerk Carol Bass, and joining us for the first time, our new Inspector General, Teresa Michael. Welcome, Ms. Michael. Senior staff members will join us periodically as directed by the Superintendent, getting feedback from somewhere. This meeting is being transcribed by a closed captioner, so remember to speak at a reasonable pace. Now please direct your attention to the flag on the screen. We're going to wait for the flag to get up there. Okay, Dr. Fenoy, will you please lead us in the pledge?
Yes, sir. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Dr. Fenoy. Quick review of our meeting protocol. As always, remember, if you are not speaking, your microphone should be on mute. Please raise your hand to get my attention. I will not acknowledge that I saw you want to speak. And I will recognize you in the order that I see your hands. Again, if this is more for the benefit of the public, if you need to step away from the meeting for a moment, please turn off your camera. For the benefit of the public, when board members step away and their cameras go off, they can still hear the meeting. So they've not left the meeting, they just left the screen. And I'll turn the workshop over to you, Dr. Fenoy.
Yes, sir. Do we have
Speakers first? Yes, sir.
Okay. Then we will go ahead. I turn back over to Mr. Chairman to go over the speakers.
Yes, we have 15 speakers. I understand that Kevon is going to put those on now. So would you go ahead and put those speakers on, the 15 that we have?
Hi, my name is Kristen, and I wanted to comment in regard to the option of either part-time or a full-time virtual school, if that's what the school board decides to do for the 2020 fall term. And I have 2 elementary age children and 1 middle school child, and their experiences in fourth quarter of this past year were very different. My elementary aged children both had a lot of virtual interaction through Google Meets with the teachers, which made a huge difference for them. My middle schooler, who had started in 6th grade, she had pretty much no interaction via Google Meet or Zoom or anything with any of her teachers or the students until the very last week of class with the 10-minute goodbye Google Meet. And I think that it's really important if the teachers can, if there's going to be virtual school, be required to have some sort of online engagement where they actually are live with the students to either give them a brief lesson, talk to them, take questions, and also for the students to see each other. My middle schooler did fine, but I'm concerned, and I know other parents are concerned as well, that kids who are sitting for 5, 6, 7 hours a day doing very Google Classrooms tasks, videos, etc. online, but not engaging with other people, that there's a huge social and emotional cost to that. And middle school is such an important and key time for these children to, see each other, hear each other, reflect each other. And I'm just hoping, even though it puts more pressure on the teachers, that, any sort of even informal, presentation of the lessons happening for 10 minutes a day, or any sort of conversations they could have online, or getting the kids to talk to each other, could make a humongous difference for these children, especially if the choice is that it's fully virtual, and could make a huge difference if it's partially virtual. Thank you for listening, and thanks for all you're doing in this crazy time.
Hi, my name is Debbie Bianco. I was calling in regards to the reopening of school in August. I have great concerns. My daughter is going into her 6th year medical. She's supposed to receive her EMR. That was canceled in April. I am an only parent. I have severe underlying medical conditions. I want to make it really clear that my daughter will not be going back to school, nor will she be forced to go back to school. And I feel like I'm being put in a position that after 6 years of medical, I may have to have her quit. And it's very unfair for the students. It's very unfair to the parents. And I would like to be involved in this discussion. I'm preferring that we do a digital schooling for the first couple of months and then see where the numbers are with the COVID, because when we did this survey online, the numbers were not through the roof, 8,000 and 10,000 new cases per day. So it's really just not an option for me or my daughter. My phone number is 561-632-9808, and if you'd like to give me a call back, my name is Debbie Bianco. Thank you and have a great day.
Hi there, my name is Cheryl Carrillo, and this message is for the meeting tomorrow evening. And I represent a large group of concerned parents who want to be given a choice to send their children to school. And we don't want that option or choice made for us. We want options, and we want to know if there's going to be a choice for families to allow their kids to go to school, as is being offered in Pasco County. We also would like to know if we're going to be only offered one option, and if you are going to make that choice for us, and again, if we're going to be allowed to have a choice from a couple of options, and one being the choice to be able to send our kids to school, and of course, safely. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Gloria Tucker, and I reside in Jupiter. I have an 11-year-old daughter that's going into the 6th grade. She will be attending Jupiter Middle School at one of the choice programs there, the multimedia. I'm calling in reference to the July 1st meeting that the superintendent and the cabinet are going to discuss the reopening options for Palm Beach County schools. I am for the returning to school campus for my daughter, and the choice, I believe, should be left up to the parents. And the choices, I believe, should be school campuses or remote learning according to the families and parents' situation at home. The hybrid method for me wouldn't be a manageable schedule for me because I am a full-time working mother, and I also need to work. Our family needs 2 incomes. I do want to commend and give kudos to Pasco County and Indian River County and the surrounding counties that are giving 3 options to the parents to choose and not the district. Also, I'd like to mention the American Academy of Pediatrics strongly advocates that the options out there should be considered for the new school year with the goal of having the students physically present in the school. I believe mentally that would be something that the children need to be face-to-face with their teachers, a one-on-one with their peers. According to my daughter, she got very depressed, not seeing her friends and not being in an actual classroom. I believe children, and I could speak for my daughter, is their safe haven to go to school, and I believe a lot of children feel that way. Their teachers are their heroes, and I believe the district and we trust that you would do the right thing going back to the classrooms and school campuses, sanitizing the classrooms, and maybe take suggestions from the parents, say UV lighting in the AC systems, and also maybe UV lighting in the classrooms. Even the hardest hit countries around the world, including Italy, are going back, having their children go back to full capacity. So please hear the voices of Palm Beach County parents and giving them the choice for their children. They are our children, and the choice should be left up to us. We are the taxpayers in this county, and I believe strongly that our voice needs to be heard, whether a parent wants the child to be remotely learning in their own home or back to school campuses. Thank you. Have a nice day.
Hi, my name is Robert Pensker. I'm a parent of Palm Beach County students. My agenda topic is school reopening, and I'm going to argue that schools need to reopen in live face-to-face class, as well as no facial covering requirement. Make it recommended. A recent study by Bhopal et al., published May 21st, 2020 in Public Health, states that children are not COVID spreaders. Children are not in danger of COVID-19 even compared to the common influenza. The state of Florida's own health record shows that nobody under the age of 26, if that person was immunocompromised, has died as a result of COVID in this state. Further, Bloomberg on June 23rd of this year cited an article, a French research study that studied 1,340 people in a town northeast of Paris and found that it's very rare for children to spread COVID, and it was actually much more likely that the parents to spread it to their children than the other way around. So, again, children are not really in danger here relative to even the flu, and they're not super spreaders either. Further, About facial coverings, there's a McIntyre et al. 2015 BMJ Open Journal and PubMed found that cloth face coverings are unable to filter 97% of particles of 3 forms of virus. Again, this is from airborne viruses. Medical masks are unable to filter 44%. The authors conclude that moisture retention, which is very big here in Florida, or use of cloth face coverings and poor filtration may result in increased infection. In fact, we state that cloth facial coverings should not be worn. The CDC's own guidance suggests that children, again, may not be necessary to wear them. According to a more recent study, 2020 New England Journal of Medicine, Compass et al., facial coverings provide a slight reduction in risk, but do not protect against droplets in eyes and so on. The authors argue for increased hand hygiene and conclude that facial coverings are symbolic roles. It just makes people feel better, but doesn't really do any protection. There's 2 meta-analyses that basically agree with those findings, Hastings et al. 2017 in epidemics, and Ben Reza et al. 2012 in influenza and other respiratory viruses. Again, we have many coronaviruses that exist, most recently H1N1, SARS and so on in our bodies, and they take their course, and we need to protect the most vulnerable, but the children certainly are not the most vulnerable and not spreaders. Okay, so they need to be, again, there's historical research that shows these masks or facial coverings are not helpful, could be harmful, and children really don't need to wear them because they're not the ones spreading the virus. Rand Paul's conversation with Dr. Fauci the other day, he had large poster boards behind him of data of 5 different countries, including Denmark, Switzerland, Austria, so on, and including France, that showed that children are not spreading the virus. After school reopenings, there was no spike in cases. So again, I think you need to take this data in consideration when you talk about what you can require for the kids. Again, there's plenty of other studies that talk about the harms, potential harms of headaches, drowsiness, weakness caused by lack of oxygen in the bloodstream by wearing facial coverings for extended periods of time. I've provided those sites already in emails. So again, there's medical, published, established research that shows that these things can be harmful. They're more of a minimum risk to the wearers, so they should not be required for our kids. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Pam Weisbrod. I'm a resident of Jupiter. My number is 321. Never mind. I'm concerned about the start of in-person classes for students and teachers in our county with a case load of 500 dead and 14,150 cases of COVID in this county. I feel that it would be an unnecessary and unsafe experiment to start in-person classes at this time. I think it's important that we have some sort of response as far as our curve flattening in this county instead of being on an increase before we put our students, teachers, and staff at risk. Thank you so much.
Hi, my name is Megan Bell, and I am a Palm Beach County parent and teacher, and I am speaking on agenda item, the workshop item about reopening schools. I would love nothing more than to return to my classroom in person with my students, but unless we take dramatic steps in Florida now, it will not be safe to reopen in-person classes in the fall. The American Association of Pediatricians was speaking for the nation as a whole when they recommended in-person school as best for children, and they were not speaking of Florida specifically. The vast majority of research supporting reopening in-person schools comes from communities where the cases were in decline when they resumed classes, not in cases where places where the cases have increased 600% or more in the last month, like what's happening in Florida right now. And while children seem to have less immediate health impacts from COVID, we do not know what the long-term health effects for them may be. So that is something to keep in mind. Also, schools are full of adults who are at risk for significant immediate health impacts from COVID. Any decision about resuming in-person classes must take into account the safety of both the teachers and the students and staff. The best way to ensure we can safely return to school in person is if we demand our local leaders take real action now to slow the community spread of COVID so we can decrease our new cases and we can gather safely together in schools if we're willing to take action right now. Thank you so much.
Good morning. This is Dr. Joaquin Garcia from Hispanic Education Coalition of Palm Beach County. I wanted to speak about the survey and going back to school. As of today, 16,000 students have not been able to be contacted because of not having internet access or computers at home. Also, the response from Hispanics to the survey, we have 4,703, African American 4,293, white counterparts 1,111. Out of those, the ELL are 3,728, and free and reduced lunch are 9,640. Now you wonder why they have not been able to be contacted or not been able to respond to the survey due to the fact that they don't have internet access and they have not been able to be contacted. They are afraid, the families are afraid, and because of they have been disproportionately affected. Access to a computer and internet is basically the nature of the status or the work traveling patterns. Are we prepared to reduce class size, distancing, and face masks? We are going to be needing double the teachers to make up for half the class size. In my humble opinion, this virus is the one who governs this situation. It's not us, it's the virus. And we need to follow the guidelines and what the scientific community tells us about. We are in the middle of a pandemic. We are in the middle of the second wave. And the United States has 130,000 deaths already reported. It's approximately 3 million people infected and 16,000 in critical condition. In the United States, worldwide, we are the first of the list. And in the U.S., New York is the top of the list. California, New Jersey, Texas, and Florida. But now Florida is surging to probably become the epicenter of the infection. Are we prepared to handle a super infection in our school district? I don't think it's wise. I think we should concentrate and give education remotely to students, making sure that the students have the ability to talk to teachers and contact them, contact their parents, and make sure that they understand that they will be safe, but we need to take in consideration. So I don't think at this point it's wise to reopen schools. We are going to probably have a larger problem than what we have today. And of course, the African Americans and Hispanics are disproportionately affected by this virus. So thank you so very much for listening to my comments, and feel free to contact me at any time, and have a great day. Thank you.
Hi, the topic I'd like to speak about is the school reopening, and my name is Nancy Gonzalez. My comment would be that I would like to voice my opinion in favor of the Pinellas County Schools teachers union, my support of them. I am a mom and I have twin 5-year-old girls, and I've been excited about them starting kindergarten. However, if our teachers are not feeling it safe to start, then my support is behind our teachers, and I want them to go and feel safe when they return to school. So I hope that we will, I know everyone's been talking about the Pediatric Association and their recommendations. We know that those recommendations were based on our entire country, and the situation in Palm Beach County and in Florida is much different than the country as a whole. And my concern would be for our bus drivers, our paraprofessionals, our teachers, school staff, people with pre-existing conditions that could potentially be put in danger. Maybe it might be safe for our children, but may not be safe for our school staff. So I'd ask that we would consider them in their house. Thank you very much for your time. Bye-bye.
Good morning. My name is Reese Harvey. I'm calling regarding the opening of school this fall as relates to the coronavirus. I hope that we can open school as soon as possible. I really want my 3 children back in school physically, and they want to be back in school physically. But I would strongly urge you to please not do so until it is safe for the students, the teachers, the parents, and the grandparents of these students, and the community at large. If the numbers are as they are now, I strongly urge you to keep school closed, at least in the beginning of the school year. It also concerns me greatly sending my children to schools that are way over capacity, as this would enhance the chance of spread of the disease. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Bridget Misselhorn. I'm calling about the workshop on school reopening. And I just want to share my concerns because although I want my children to be able to go to school in the fall, I'm worried that it's not safe to reopen with the number of cases we have in Florida right now. I know that the rest of the nation is looking to reopen, but the rest of the nation does not have the double in percentage numbers that we have had this last month. So I would like to share my support with our community leaders and our local leaders in taking real action to slow the spread of COVID so that we can open schools when it is safe and when our numbers as a community are lower. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Erin Haig. I'm calling regarding the topic for school reopening. I have 2 elementary school students. One will be entering kindergarten at Plumosa School of the Arts. The other one will be entering 2nd grade at Plumosa School of the Arts. I am in favor of prioritizing K through 5 returning to the classroom while middle and high school students remain on the virtual platform. I want to praise the teachers for all of their hard work in trying to mobilize to an online platform last minute in March. They did an amazing job. However, the virtual distance learning is not effective for young elementary school students, especially those in the dual language classroom. Children at that age really require the interaction of their teachers, and the virtual platform at home requires 100% full participation on the parents' part to keep them online and making sure that they are able to access, participate, and submit all assignments. It's not practical when parents have to return to work. I am all in favor of postponing the start date of school in order to wait for cases of COVID-19 to decrease. However, I don't think that we should rush to put elementary school kids on the virtual platform. I think it's best to wait until we are able to allow the elementary school kids to return in classroom full time. So I am fully in support of prioritizing K through 5 grades to return in classroom
as soon as it is safe to do so. Thanks. Bye.
Good morning. My name is Nicole Sheehan, Shehan, and I am a parent of a pre-K 4 student at Eisenhower Elementary. I'm calling in regards to the agenda item of schools reopening on August 10th. I want to say I know it's important for our students to go back, and especially our elementary kids and our pre-K kids, because they get the most of learning by being there socially and being able to interact with one another. And virtual learning has been great, but it doesn't interact with them the way that those kids at that age level do by being in the classroom and having hands-on with the teacher and with their friends. However, with the latest spike in numbers in Florida, and especially South Florida and Palm Beach County, I propose or recommend that we delay the start of school until the day after Labor Day. At this point, we can look to see where numbers are come mid-August, and if things aren't getting better to our satisfaction to where it would be safe for students, staff, and everyone involved, then we can look to doing virtual learning. However, I think temporarily we should consider, starting school, the day after Labor Day and going from there to see how we should progress. Nothing more is safe for our students, staff and faculty. Our kids are at less chance of getting sick, but if they do, it is more severe. However, there is a risk of staff and faculty becoming ill and it becoming detrimental to their physical well-being and the well-being of their families. So I think for all concerned at this time, it would be a good idea to start school the day after Labor Day, and we can reevaluate by August 15th to see if that would be a virtual learning environment solely, or if at that time we could consider doing a virtual learning and a combination of in-person learning. Thank you for your time.
Hello, my name is Nina Boynton, and I am calling in regards to school reopening. I am calling to say that with the situation as it is, it's not safe to reopen our schools, and we should not be reopening the schools until it is safe to do so. Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Shelby Anderson, and I'm calling regarding the schools reopening in August. I would like to say that I would like the schools to open in August. Virtual learning for my child last year was absolutely horrible. My son has an IEP and has since he was 3.5. He has dyslexia. We were at Beacon Cove. All work completed and turned in was never returned with a grade. No ESC services were provided. And he actually was failing math the whole year last year. And if we continue to go forward with virtual learning, I feel that he will fall further behind. I feel all students with IEPs will continue to fall further behind. And I hope that you will consider my message. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Fenoy, that's the end of our speakers if you want to take over.
Yes, sir. I'd like to make a few comments before we start the workshop as the team gets ready. To the parents, students, staff, and community members who are eagerly awaiting information about the 2020-21 school year, I thank you for your patience. I implemented a timeline months ago with the conviction of keeping our community aware of milestones and best decisions in a timely manner. Although COVID-19 developments seem to change daily, we have maintained the timeline I set to keep you informed. In June, the district sent 2 separate surveys regarding the reopening of schools, one to parents and guardians and others to employees. The data team analyzed more than 85,000 responses from parents and staff. That input is being seriously considered as the district makes final decisions narrowing down our reopening options. Today, as promised in the timeline, the reopening task force will share with the board and the community the findings of the surveys. Looking ahead, during the July 8th virtual workshop, the Reopening Task Force will share all reopening recommendations with the school board. Then on July 15th, after taking into account input from the board, the community, and the Health Advisory Committee and other health officials, I will share the final reopening plans during the virtual school board meeting on the 15th. Between now and the start of school, I will continue to work with district office staff, regional superintendents, and principals to operationalize final reopening plans. A lot of work is going on behind the scenes to prepare for the new school year, a school year that will be like no other. I'm asked quite frequently, when will we return to school? Perhaps the more important question is how we will return to school. All decisions must be based on a variety of critical factors, including health and safety, equity, capacity, financial feasibility, legal compliance, and much, much more. I can say without conviction that school as normal is not an option this year. What I mean by that is our campuses will look different when the new school year begins. Guidelines will be implemented based on safety, sanitation, and social distancing. Distance learning will remain with us moving forward through this pandemic and beyond. It will be used during other emergency situations when conventional teaching is not an option. So this afternoon, I ask you to listen with an open mind as the Reopening Task Force shares its findings. We have important and complicated decisions to make in the best interest of all of our students and staff moving forward. At this time, I would like the team that's presenting the survey results to the board on reopening in the community to begin at this time.
Thank you, Dr. Flournoy. It's Paul Hutchins. Board, thank you for this time today, and I'll just go ahead and share my screen and get started. So as Dr. Flournoy said, this past month we surveyed both parents, community, and staff regarding the reopening of school options and a few other factors in terms of what informed their decisions. We'll go through that today. As I step through, I'll orient to the findings we've had. I'll pause once we finish the parent section to see if we have any questions before moving into staff. And then obviously we can discuss as you want as we go through. So again, just to reiterate Dr. Flournoy's comments, the results of these surveys are obviously from mid to 2/3 of the way through June, and we've had spikes in cases, so some folks' opinions may have definitely shifted in this situation. Obviously, there's a lot of fluidity. To that point, any opening plans are going to have to take into account recommendations from health and medical officials. Just a level set to the parent survey. We launched on the June 5th, and it was open for roughly 2 weeks. There were questions regarding the three main options for return: a full return, a distance learning return, or a blended model. Parents were then asked about the factors that influenced their preferences. Their support for certain changes being proposed for the 2021 school year. And roughly 66,000, over 66,000 respondents reported in. One big caveat here is the data are all self-reported. So, that is to be taken with it's a self-report data. So in terms of the participation, as I was saying, 66,348 surveys were completed. Parents were asked to report how many children were in their household. And so roughly 114,000 of the district students were represented in these 66,000 surveys. If you look down and to the left, we asked what grade levels the students were represented from. And as you can see, 32% of the responses had pre-K to 2 students in the household. Roughly 36% had either 3 to 5 or 6 to 8 or both in the household, and 42% of the respondents indicated they had a student in grades 9 through 12 in the household. Based on our student enrollment population, as you can see from this, our responses were a little weighted heavily towards the secondary level over primary grades. If you move across the slide to the right, you'll see are reporting by self-reported race, ethnicity of the respondent. A little less than 43% of the respondents were white, which is an overrepresentation for our district, whereas 28% reported being Hispanic and 13% Black, which is underrepresented for our population. Looking to the lower left-hand side, we reported out by our special populations, English language learners, a little less than 6%, so underrepresented. Roughly 20% reported that they were receiving some form of exceptional student education. And finally, 33% reported receiving free and reduced lunch, which is, again, somewhat underrepresented for the district. 51% of the respondents reported they did not receive any of those three services for their students. And then finally, for this slide, if we move over to the right and the bottom, we did survey in our four typical languages: English, Spanish, Portuguese, and Asian Creole. I'll move this so you can see. 88% of the respondents responded to the English version, 10% to the Spanish version, and much smaller numbers to the Portuguese and Haitian Creole versions of the survey. That's not to say our bilingual parents didn't choose to finish the English version of the survey. It's just not something we can have visibility into. We estimated response by region. We asked the respondents to report their home zip code, and then we used that to identify what region of the school system they lived in. So overall, going back to that initial data point with 66,000 respondents representing 114,000 students, based on our enrollment at the time, that's roughly 66% of our students represented, as I mentioned. When we break that down by region, the central region, roughly 59% of the students are represented. For the Glades, roughly 36% of the students are represented. And then for North, 66, and South, 72. So again, as you can see, we've got a little bit different representation to the parent survey responses by region. So moving to the first set of items that addressed, I apologize, that addressed the question about either full reopening as a blended model, or reopening as distance learning. As we look at this slide, there's a lot of data here. The key takeaway is that more than one option for reopening will likely be needed. But as we look here to the left, this is the proportion of respondents who favored full reopening, with roughly 54% of our respondents overall reporting that they supported a full reopening. But as you can see, by region, that varied, with only 31% of respondents from the Glades supporting a full reopening. If we move to the right, the blended model, that was pretty consistent across the regions, with roughly 54% of respondents showing support that they could support that model for reopening schools. Then the next set of data are the distance learning, where 51% overall reported support, but you can see the Central and Glades regions were higher, with 55 and nearly 69% of respondents being in favor of distance learning, respectively, from those two regions. Then as we move over to the right, the way the survey questions were asked, the parents were asked, could they support each of these models? What degree to which could they support these models? And so several parents reported support for multiple models. So here towards the center, roughly 29% of our parents overall supported either full reopening or blended. Again, the Glades, that's only about 20% supported that, but otherwise it's pretty consistent. The blended or distance, 33% of our parents overall supported that, and again with a higher proportion in the Glades at 39% being able to support both either blended or distance. And then moving over, continuing to the right, there were roughly 16% of respondents who indicated they could support full reopening or distance, which seems to be the two extremes. And then finally, roughly 15% supported all three models. They were in favor of any of the options they were given. So again, just to reiterate, the key takeaway here is that we're likely going to need more than one option for our parents. Breaking down further, same questions, same data set, but breaking it down by the race, ethnicity of our respondents, Black, Hispanic, or white. You can see that support for full reopening is higher for the white respondents than the Hispanic or Black. Moving from left to right on the top graph, similar, comparatively speaking, for blended, with Black and Hispanic parents being more likely to support blended than the white parents. And then distance, with Black and Hispanic parents being much more likely to support a distance learning model than the white parents. And again, we report by multiple models as well. Looking into our special populations, ELL, ESE, and free and reduced. Blended models pretty consistent across those three groups with some variability amongst full reopening and distance. I forgot to mention early on, and I apologize, the slides are numbered, so if you have a question that we need to go back to, in the bottom right-hand corner, there are slide numbers, so if need be, you can reference a slide when we come to a question, we can go back to it. So moving on from that question about general preferences of full reopening, blended, or distance, we move into the factors that were influencing parent responses. We broke down all of the data by the different disaggregations that we were able to, the race, the region, the grade levels of the students being represented, and the special populations. We're only reporting out where there were differences seen. So if there weren't generally differences between respondents, we just report the overall because there's a lot of data here. And so if we want to drill in further, we can. It's just not necessarily right here in this slide deck tonight. So a little less than a third of our parents thought a COVID vaccine being available to be an important factor in their choice for reopening preferences. That's in the upper left. Moving across, nearly all of our parents, over 85%, definitely found enhanced cleaning as an important factor in their preferences for return. 66% indicated that limited seating and maintaining social distancing in classrooms was important. One of the other key factors here is that, and while we've got some pretty substantial responses in terms of favorability or unfavorability, the proportion of folks answering unsure may lend itself to some further discussions as we're rolling out whatever plan the district comes to once that time comes. Moving over again to the right, the children's ability to thrive academically in a distance learning setting. 83% of respondents found that to be important, and over 90% were definitely concerned and found it important that their child's social emotional well-being be addressed. So within question 7 about factors, a couple of the items did have some differences by in this case, race and region. So while 42% of respondents found it important because someone in the household belongs to one of the high-risk groups, 48% overall reported that wasn't an important factor to them in their responses. But when we look at this by race, you can see that there's a different trend there, with it being more important, with 52% for Black respondents and 45% for Hispanic respondents, and less important for white respondents with 36%. Looking over to the right, you'll see that similar to some of the previous findings with the reopening options, this was, the glades looked a little bit different than the other regions here, with over 50% of their respondents from the glades finding it important that someone in the household has a high risk in terms of identifying their return option. Another one where there were some differences more by level and by race than by region. This was pretty consistent across region. The parents' ability to work from home or have supervision for their children. 64% overall found this to be important, but when you break it down by grade band, as you would expect, it's more important in the pre-K to 5 range, with over 70% of the respondents from those two groups indicating it was important. And by race, 70% for Black and Hispanics identifying that childcare was important to their decision making, whereas it was 56% for white. Moving into question 8, which addressed, it addressed what the full return versus blended models might look like and support for possibilities there. So the first question was around, physically returning to school all days of the week, all students present. This is essentially the full-time, what you would call a normal schedule, although obviously we would have to take social distancing and some other factors into account. But 40% of the respondents supported a full return, and 38% did not support. Again, when you break this down by race, we see a different picture, with it being more than flipped for our Black and Hispanic communities, with over 40% not supporting a full return, and only a little, around 30% supporting a return. Whereas the white respondents, 30% supported or did not support return, and nearly 50% did support return. Again, the response patterns look different in the Glades than they did in the other regions. Central as well, to a certain extent. Over 50% of the respondents in the Glades, from the Glades schools, did not support a full return, whereas over 40% in the North and South regions did support, and Central was more of a kind of a mixed bag, with 42% not supporting and 36% supporting a return. So that's the full return. Now we're moving into the blended looks. In the upper left, that first question is around students returning to school all days during the week, but in part-time shifts to maintain smaller class sizes. Response patterns here were somewhat similar to question A, with roughly 40% supporting and a little less than 40% not supporting this option. Again, there's a different look by race on this one, with more support from the Black and Hispanic respondents versus the white respondents. Moving into the second option, which was physically attending school on alternating days while participating in distance learning on the opposite days. Nearly 50% of respondents supported this item. A little over a third didn't. When we look by race, the support from the Black and Hispanic communities is greater than 50%, with the white community respondents a little less than, about 46%. So there was a little bit of a difference by race there. Again, the other respondent groups, region, grade bands, etc., they were pretty similar in their responses, so they're not reported here. One of the items that was pretty consistent across all respondents and all groups was the lack of support for physically returning on alternating weeks and participating in distance learning on the other weeks. Nearly 50% of the respondents did not support this option, with a much smaller number, around a third, supporting it. So again, the big takeaway here is some of the blended options are preferred, particularly over the alternating week options. But other than that, it's pretty even. Moving into additional preferences for timing and activities. This was really kind of, once we come back, what would you be in favor of seeing? What would you have issue with? The first option, or the first item, was around large-scale school-sponsored activities. Marching band, theater, concert, sports was the example. 42% of respondents supported that, whereas 30% did not. 9B addressed staggering the drop-off and pickup times for students to reduce crowding around entrance and exit. 56% of the respondents supported that, whereas 26% did not. Moving to a year-round school model, 27% of respondents supported that, whereas 45% did not. But a large number here, and similar to A as well, 27% in both cases are unsure how they felt about that. Moving to 9D, which was, came up a few times on the public speakers this afternoon. 46% of the respondents supported delaying a return to school beyond August 10th. Roughly a third did not support that, with a little less than 21% identifying as unsure as how they felt. One of the other pieces around prioritizing elementary over secondary, moving elementary back into physical campuses while keeping secondary in a distance environment. 31. I'm sorry, do we have a question? Okay. 31% supported that, whereas 45% did not support that. And then finally, the question was around before and after care was asked, and roughly 28% of respondents indicated they would likely need before and or after care, and 60% indicated they would not. That's the question to the bottom right. So big takeaways here are, there's more respondents in favor of delaying the start of school, but prioritizing the return of some students over others. Nearly half, at 45% of parents, didn't support that option. Breaking it down, as I mentioned earlier, the items where we don't look deeper, we did look. There's not much to report in terms of differences, but there were some differences in support for large-scale activities, whereas Black and Hispanic populations, roughly 36%, both supported and did not support, so it was pretty even amongst those communities as to whether they supported those activities, whereas the white respondents, over 50%, supported return to large-scale activities. It's another one where there was a difference by region, with the Glades having less support than the other regions. Moving to the year-round model was also somewhat different, with, again, for Black and Hispanic respondents, this is in the middle of the slide to the left, identifying roughly similar opposition and support for that, whereas the white respondents, 56%, were opposed to moving to a year-round model. This also varied by those respondents indicating their students receiving ELL, ESE, or free and reduced services, with the majority of ELL parents unsure about a return to the year-round model. Most ESE parents, 44%, not supporting a year-round model, and free and reduced, 36% not supporting and 28% supporting. Again, the no services group are just people who indicated they did not receive any of those three services, and over half of those respondents did not support moving to a year-round model. Then looking to the delay beyond August 10th, there was more support for that amongst the Black and Hispanic respondents, with 56% of Black respondents and 48% of Hispanic respondents supporting a delay, whereas it was more even amongst white respondents, with 38% not supporting a delay and 42% supporting a delay. And then finally, by region, again, there was more support for a delay in the Glades and Central regions. And then the responses were more similar in the North and South region, at 36% not supporting in the North versus 44%, and 35% not supporting in the South versus 45%. Transportation and food service. These items were really targeted towards parents who were using these resources. So the gray areas indicate for the items on the left that transportation doesn't apply to those students. So 21% of the folks who responded indicated they will be using a bus again in the 2021 school year. And 16% of respondents indicated that was the student's only option for getting to school. So, we'll share these broken down a little bit deeper with the reopening group around transportation to help them kind of guide their work. For food service, 43% of respondents indicated they would continue to use meals at school when they were physically back, and 26% in the bottom right indicated a need for grab-and-go meals during any distance learning options. Moving into the distance learning preferences, so we started with full reopening, transitioned the thoughts around blended, and now we're kind of coming into what the respondents indicated was important for distance learning. Because in 2 of the 3 options, we're coming back with some degree of distance learning, be it either full-time or in a blended model. So 68% of respondents indicated the need, that it was important to have whole class meetings with the teachers. 79% of respondents indicated a need for small group lessons with the teachers. 85% indicated it was important to have virtual office hours, both for students and parents to reach out to teachers. Only 44% indicated it was important to have collaborative group projects while in distance learning. Flexibility in scheduled activities. This is kind of when meetings are and how students access their instruction. 77% of respondents indicated flexibility was important. 62%, moving all the way to the right in the middle, online discussions, discussion boards, blogs, anything that would allow kind of an interactive back and forth. 62% of the respondents found that to be important. And then getting into the last 2, which were really very highly favored, the respondents thought them very important. Frequent feedback on student progress, 94% indicated that was important. And then learning assignments that can be accessed and completed at any time. 87% of respondents found that to be important. These responses to this item were almost universally consistent. No real differences amongst the different types of respondents in terms of how they felt about those issues. When asked about access to a computer, again, as we move into going forward with needing some kind of distance learning, 81% of our respondents indicated every child in the household had access to their own device for distance learning. One of the things that kind of came up in conversation and feedback from the parents during the last quarter of the 2020 year, I'm sure you all heard, the students having to share hardware and schedule times was a difficulty and a barrier for some families. So 81%, as I said, 81% indicated students have access to their own devices. When you look by grade band, this was higher in the higher grades, and the lower you went, the lower that was. So our pre-K to 2 students, only 71% of respondents indicated the students had access to their own device. Moving down the slide, the grades, 66% of respondents indicated that that all of the children in the household had access to their own device for distance learning, whereas the other regions, the response was up around 80%. And then finally, by race, Black and Hispanic populations had fewer respondents indicating that everyone had access to their own device compared to the white respondents at 85%. And moving back to the last item 18 around, just basically asking about difficulties that the children encountered during distance learning. 79% indicated their children did not have any difficulties. And it goes down from there. Roughly 9% indicated that they don't have a working computer at this point. Also, roughly 9% indicated they had trouble watching videos due to internet quality. Indicated 5% indicated there was a barrier around monthly fees. Roughly 4% indicated that their children were accessing using a cell phone hotspot, and then less than 1%, but it is there in terms of the respondents, indicated that their subdivision or community didn't actually. So that's the findings from access to a computer. So the survey also had open response items. And parents were encouraged to provide feedback kind of across the big sets of items. Other reopening options, other important factors that may be not listed in the forced response areas, any other important feedback that they wanted to share, or any additional support needed. And while those are 4 very different questions, the responses came back in very common themes. They were all, and regardless of the question, the responses were very common. So roughly 15,000 respondents responded to each of those open-ended items. As I was saying, similar themes emerged across. The real polarizing sentiments. Children need to be back in school, which was very common, versus it's not safe to send children back to school. It was less common, but it was still there. But in general, the top 5 concerns expressed across the open items were issues about the family work or parents working from home, the availability of a vaccine, student supervision when they're not in school, adequate safety measures, cleaning, etc., for when they are in school, and then the adequacy of the students' digital learning experience based on what they saw this past year. So slide 20, I'm just going to leave it up here for a minute and open up to questions. This is just the big findings from what we just walked through. There was 66% of our parents, 66% of the students, their guardians made their voices heard.
Mr. Hodges, let me interrupt for a minute. Mr. Shaw, question.
Yes. One of the slides, the one that talked about whether or not students have access to devices, do we have any information on how much of that is that the student actually does not have a device itself, as opposed to areas of the county that do not have Wi-Fi or internet access?
Yes, sir, Mr. Shaw. Of the respondents, down here to the left in the blue bar chart, 8.7% of the folks who responded indicated their child doesn't have a working computer currently, versus a little less than 1% indicating that their actual community doesn't have access to the internet, and another 9% indicating they had bandwidth issues, so that they had access, but the quality wasn't what they needed to interact with the instruction in a video kind of way. And then 5%, 4.7% indicated they couldn't afford the monthly fees.
Okay, Ms. Brill and then Mrs. Andrews have questions. Ms. Brill first.
Thank you. And so my question is more general. This survey went out just online, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
So we have to figure in the fact that a lot of those families may not have completed the survey if they don't have computer access. And so, my concern, I think the data is wonderful. It will help guide us, but, I'm concerned about the low numbers in the Glades, the responses that we weren't able to reach those families. And I realize that in listening to this, that whatever we do, we have to do a better job of reaching all those families. So when we do, we know as the superintendent said, there's going to be a distant virtual track of some sort. We have to keep that going. When we go to get feedback from the families as to what has worked and what hasn't worked, we've just got to find a better way to reach them. 66% is great, but I'm just worried about the gaps in the information that we've received.
Yes, ma'am.
Mrs. Andrews, then Dr. Robinson.
And thank you. And my concern is similar to what Mrs. Brill has said.
when we go back to page 1, and we saw that 13% of the African American families filled out the survey, and 20% with the Hispanics. So we haven't really reached the people that truly need to respond. As I look at the responses, it kind of falls in place with what I hear from the communities, especially the Glades communities. And when we look at people that we talk to that's having difficulty, you got 16,000 Hispanic children that were not able to access distance learning from the letter that we received from the Hispanic Education Coalition. Look at all of these groups, we're missing. Now, one of the things I did share with Dr. Fanoa and others is that we've got to find a way to communicate with these families before we make final decisions here, because a lot of the families have not been touched. And so I just want to know, have you been thinking about ways in which you're going to communicate with these families who have not had a voice in this process?
I'll take that.
Please.
So the answer is yes. The regional superintendents have been working through another set of surveys that will be more based from the schools that they will send out, and we're approving it, and we're going to work on it as a district. But each principal will be sending out collecting information from their parents, and we're scheduled to do that right after the 15th. So that gives us more time to get more information from the health department. It gives people more time. And then also the regional superintendents have all been collecting data from the town halls that they have been conducting as well. And so those are the two areas to further that. It also should be noted that I've heard several people talk about the internet access. In Palm Beach, we were very fortunate in our communications department. We can actually send the survey to people's cell phones. So a lot of people were responding through cell phones, even if they didn't have the internet.
Dr. Robin, well, go ahead, Ms. Sanders, you have a follow-up?
Yeah, just to follow up, when you see the numbers, it's still really bad. And one of the things I did bring up, that we have a radio station in the Glades region where we can actually do communications. The Haitian radio stations are out there. And I don't know if we've actually collaborated with the communities. Everybody's listening to the radio. As we walk through these processes, I would hope that we would find other ways, i.e. not just the telephone, but other ways to communicate. And one would be getting on the radio and having some town halls where you can interface with the community. Other people can call in and give suggestions, working it through your region superintendents. And I've already put those suggestions out there. So as we look at the crisis that we're in now, we've got to continue communicating almost daily on what we're going to have to do. And we need to hear those parents that are truly hit, because we've got certain sections of Palm Beach County that are in desperate shape. I mean, all of Palm Beach County is bad, but we've got some sections that are worse than others. And we've got to put a different program in place to get the voices of those people.
Dr. Robinson.
Thank you. I have several disjointed questions. So first, let's start again with the method, because what I thought was that this survey went out via cell phone and email to all parents. So tell me where I got that wrong, please.
Yes, ma'am. The survey was sent out via communications, I believe with a link, but the actual completion was from, so they could take it on their cell phone. You know, they could, but they would need like a smartphone to take it. So it's still an internet-based survey, not like a phone, press 1 to agree, plus 2 to disagree. It wasn't that type of survey, but it was a link sent out, I believe, through text message, as well as posted to various avenues through communications.
Okay, so I would just like, by way of follow-up, because I really hate misunderstanding. So can I just get, by way of follow-up later, if you can, just provide us with information about how they responded from their text versus from their email, if you can. The other thing is just to clarify some of those percentages at the beginning. So when it says for example, 28.4% Hispanic and under the respondents' race for the parent reopening survey participants. Does that mean that 28.4% of Hispanic parents responded, or 28.4% of the respondents were Hispanic?
28.4% of the respondents were Hispanic.
Okay, that's what I thought it meant. So then moving on, so the slide that showed transportation, let's see, you're not sharing anymore, right? I don't see it anymore.
They asked me to unshare for a minute, but I can bring it back up in just a minute.
Well, that's fine. I have it open anyway, but the one, I'm just curious about the transportation. If you would explain that again. So was that, tell me the denominator. Who's the denominator on that?
So the denominator for that item is all respondents.
Okay.
So, 55%, if you look to question 10 up here, indicated that the transportation item did not apply to them.
Okay,
and so roughly 14,000 respondents, or 21%, indicated that yes, they were planning to take a bus this coming year. About 7,300, or 11%, indicated they were not planning on taking the bus this year, and 8,400, roughly 13%, indicated they were unsure.
Okay, so then the gray part are the people who did not use the bus last year.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and then, so then what perked my ears up was 16% said that the bus was the only option for them. So that is in fact 16% of all respondents, not 16% of people who use the bus.
Correct.
Okay. So then just a couple more comments here at this point. So the other thing is, it's been like 25 million surveys out there. I exaggerate, of course, but there's a lot of surveys out there. So can we make sure that we're working with our community partners like Bridges and others who have done and in the process of doing surveys to share that information with the board and district leadership, because they might already have captured or be capturing some information that we want. I think we probably missed an opportunity when we didn't make this survey sortable by school. But I get that hindsight's 2020. And the last thing I want to say is on this common themes slide at the end, the polarized major sentiments, children need to be in school and it's not safe to send children to school. Both of those things are true. So, I mean, that's kind of that either or thinking that one or the other has to be true and the other one would not be true. I mean, I just need to put that out there because both of those things are true, and which is why our decision making is difficult. So I'm done. Ma'am. Thank you.
Sorry, Mrs. Andrews, go ahead, and then Mrs. Whitfield.
Yes, access to a computer. I see the numbers there. Now, I know that the regions, as well as Mark Howard, had a survey, had information as to how many kids actually accessed the computer, and they knew how many computers were actually delivered to homes. I don't know how this information jives with their information. Did you look at both? These are just the people that took the survey. So we look and we see a lot of people didn't. So as a result, with the information that we already have within our system as to a lot of the children who did not get a computer or did not log in or did not have internet access, how does that look with this these figures that we have here on this access to the computer?
So this survey was administered in an anonymous fashion, so we can't really triangulate it with the other data we have. But the portal data that we tracked through the fourth quarter of the school year, roughly 99% of our students accessed the portal, the student portal, at least once over the last 9 weeks of school. That's not our goal, but that's just, to identify that they did get to the system at least once. Roughly 65,000 students were accessing the district portal for instruction using a device that was provided by the district. And we were able to track that and, throughout the last quarter of the year. And then roughly, and I apologize because I just don't have the numbers right in front of me right now, 14,000 students accessed the portal 2 times a week or fewer on average over the full 9 weeks. And those students were provided in a roster to schools. Schools were provided rosters throughout of students who weren't accessing on a weekly basis to follow up with. And then at the end of the year, that 14,000 that had not accessed more than twice a week on average, those rosters were provided out to the schools, and they provided some feedback on the difficulties and barriers those children had. Some of them had moved and just not withdrawn. Some of them were accessing, with their teacher via phone or some other manner. And some were accessing actually a Google Classroom or some other instructional, just not going through the district portal to get there. So there's a lot of granularity in that data. But we did follow up with the schools on it.
Dr. Fenoy, would you like to respond on that also? I saw your hand.
Yeah, I just want to let the board know, and I'll work with communications to get you the information. But we did do Spanish and Haitian Creole radio, and we also handed out some paper surveys through our multicultural department. So I'll get the team to gather all that information, and I'll get it to the board.
Thank you. Mrs. Whitfield.
Thank you. I just wanted to give just a couple of quick comments on the survey. I actually got to fill it out as a parent, and it was somewhat confusing the way that it was written to me. I felt like it didn't really boil down to what I really wanted. There was a lot of "would you be okay with" type questions, and truthfully, when I wrote the answers, I was okay with whatever the school district decided, and I kind of felt like that must be the case for a lot of parents. But what would you truly want didn't feel like it was covered. So I had some issues with that, and my recommendation was going to be that we try to do some focus groups around the next survey that we do to really make sure that the answers get to what we were wanting to actually understand. And the other thing I wanted to mention was they sent the survey to both me and my husband, which makes sense. So he filled it out as well. So that is one child that got counted twice for the school system with, I'm not sure what his answers were, but I think that we need to find a way to make sure that we at least put on there, is there someone else in your family that could have filled this out? So we could, isolate that data, or if we do it by school, that might actually make more sense. We could know if the population was changed. So that's it. Thank you.
Mrs. McQuinn, then Mrs. Andrews.
I don't want to jump ahead here, and so I'm sure that Dr. Fenoy is listening to me carefully. He knows that I have requested just through him, because only he and his staff know how this can happen. But we have to get to the point that the school district is contacting the parent of every single student by school. So I want to throw in there that my biggest concern about the survey is that, and I think we can extrapolate to it being worst case scenario, is the ones who didn't have access to technology are the very ones who didn't have access to technology to respond to the survey. So I think we just know that those numbers are worse than they look. And I'm not, like I said, I'm not going to ask Dr. Fenoy to respond to this right now, but ultimately we aren't going to know until, as Dr. Fenoy laid out the timeline, and I'm looking at it, until schools individually contact every parent, we're not going to have the information we want through focus groups or anything else, in my mind.
Mrs. Andrews.
Thank you. And the surveys that you say that you're getting ready to send out, I know the last survey, I had to request it. I had not seen it. As a board member, I think I would like to see the survey. So we would like to see what's going out to the families, by the schools, the group or your task force. I would like to see them. One of the things that some of my constituents said, that it was very tiresome, the survey itself. And a lot of people had the difficulty to keep going from page to page and clicking back here and clicking back there. So they just gave up on it. And so one of the things they were talking about is trying to make sure it's not so cumbersome. There should be some basic questions that everybody needs to answer as we move forward. So I'm just thinking as a board member, I'd like to see the survey, too, before it gets out there.
Mr. Superintendent.
Yes, ma'am. The regional superintendents submitted a draft survey yesterday, much shorter. It's like just a couple of questions. And so that is now, we're going to send that to the team when we get back from the holidays, review that, and I will share those two short surveys with the board. But the regional superintendents have done that work already.
All right, I've got a comment, Mr. Superintendent. One of the benefits is going at the end is that all the questions I was going to ask have been asked, but I'm concerned that we still have children in the district after we went through the last 3 months of the school year. They're telling us that they don't have any devices at home. I thought we would have worked that out long before, 5 weeks before we're supposed to restart the school system. So I'm very concerned that we're not getting that information. And as the other board member said, I mean, there's some people that couldn't respond at all, which means they probably don't have a device. So that the 8.7% of the respondents that said they don't have a device at home is probably much higher than that. So, I mean, we need to make that a priority, because no matter what kind of reopening we have, we need to make sure that children, every child, has some way to log back in with us, whether they're at home sick or they're doing distance learning or they're in the classroom and then they go home because something happens at the school. We need to make sure those kids have what they need. And that should be a priority, because like I said, no matter what we do, if those kids aren't able to log on with us, then we're failing those children. So that's got to be a priority immediately, to find out which children need that. And as one of the other board members, or several of them, suggested, the schools need to contact every parent as soon as possible and find out what equipment they need at home and whether they need Wi-Fi, whether they need hotspots. Some of them responded that they don't have the money to pay the monthly fee. I understood that Comcast is providing some of that services. I believe it's $10 a month for some families. In other hardship cases, they're actually giving the Wi-Fi for free. But we need to make sure that before we restart the system, every kid in the district has the opportunity to log back in with us, so we don't lose them. So we need to make that a priority.
Sir, yes, Mr. Chairman, if I may, that is an absolute priority. The CFO is already working up plans with his team for a major computer purchase. Actually, as if I understand it correctly, the deputy superintendent and his team, when we were handing out devices the first time, any family that contacted us, we made that happen. I mean, we had teams in the Glades and in Riviera Beach driving to people's homes, dropping off machines. And so I think, to your point, which I agree with, once we start serving, individual principals reach out to their families, we will find all that information out. I think it'll be a great opportunity. We have great partnerships, obviously, with our Ed Foundation, and we've had great support from the Business Development Board and Economic Council. So I'm sure those teams will still be ready to help us to meet those needs if necessary. But it is a priority, and the team is pushing through that.
All right, Mrs. Andrews, you have a question, then Ms. Brill.
Yes, we just sent the letter from the Hispanic Education Coalition about 16,000 students that did not have access. So we can really make a connection to them immediately. Apparently somebody's done some research as to where these children are, what the problems are. And that's a group that we can begin to meet with and talk about how we can get out into that community and figure out what's going on, especially with our Hispanic children. And the same thing for the Glades region. I was happy to see the hotspots that just came. And my question was, did we have it for Lake Worth and some of these other areas? And I heard that they're not there yet. So, I mean, people know they're in need. I mean, we're talking about a few more weeks and we'll be into August. and they can't get online to do any of this stuff, parents or students. So we need to talk to some of our key stakeholders like HEC and others, and they can really kind of help you along the way.
Yes, ma'am. Staff is literally working on a letter right now, and they'll be working with HEC. I saw the letter yesterday.
Ms. Brill and then Mrs. Whitfield.
Thank you. So along with the comments that Mr. Barbieri made about the devices, I was going to go into the infrastructure needs that we have. Mrs. Andrews did mention that. I think that we are going to also have to teach our parents where possible, if they do, if some of the children have a cell phone, how to use their cell phone as a hotspot, because a lot of these families are not going to be around to help the children with the distance learning. I do think that the comments Mrs. Whitfield made were very valuable to me. I didn't think of the survey from a parent's perspective. And bingo, the light went on when Mrs. Whitfield said that both she and her husband completed the survey. So that tells you that, you know, we really don't know the accuracy of the numbers. And then the other thing I was going to say is I completely agree with what Mrs. McQuinn said. With regard to reaching those children, reaching them through their schools. So, you know, this is, I'm sure everybody feels the same way as I do, such a huge task we're undertaking. You know, I'm not sleeping at night because I'm worrying about how we open. It's very difficult. But I think that we made a good start. I just think that we have a lot more to do and in a very short period of time.
Mrs. Whitfield and Dr. Robinson.
Just very briefly, one other concern that I have is about the homeless population or about students who may become homeless very shortly. You know, right now there's a moratorium on evictions, but unfortunately that's going to end soon. And when it does, I think our families are going to be unable to access any distance learning during that time. And so I think if the principals can, or the area superintendents can, we need to find out if people have an insecure housing situation where they may not, you know, have confidence that they're going to have a home or access to the internet in the next 6 months. So maybe it's you know, people could think ahead for where, you know, where their confidence level is on their ability to be able to access distance learning if that was the option.
Dr. Robinson.
Yes, so let me just make sure. Are we going to go through the staff survey or no?
I believe so.
Okay, I'm just checking. So, because some of my comments will address that. So in terms of the conversation on the table, first off, let me say, this was a survey, not a study, right? So, I mean, so you take it with its flaws. I mean, you know that it's kind of a estimate. Like, yeah, this is not a study. So, you know, whatever day it was, the Budget Advisory Committee met. I have it on the record. Mr. Burke told Budget Advisory Committee that we have set aside the funds, allocated the funds for a one-on-one device for every student, right? So he said it on the record. And I want to make sure that they are high quality devices, right? That they're not the rehabbed devices that may not function as we need to, right? We have lots of community partners who are reaching out wanting to help. And so I think that we, once we know who, if we know Johnny, Sue, and Sally need devices, we can make sure Johnny, Sue, and Sally get them. Now, with regard to the internet, I actually participated in a meeting, whatever day it was, with folks from the county. And, you know, they have resumed, and we have our representation there to resume working on how do we make internet available across the county. And because I can see some gaps, there's all these folks out here who want to help. And so long story short is I took it upon myself to ask Eric Kelly from Quantum Foundation if he would act as the community owner to gather the community forces to help support the access to distance learning for us, just so that there's somebody who is like the face on the community side. County and school districts still working on it, but he authorized me to say that publicly. Now, in terms of what the schools need to do, I mean, one thing is, and I've alluded to this before, or maybe I straight out said it, but the schools need to figure out how much square footage they have and how many children they can hold 6 feet apart. I mean, classroom by classroom. But the other thing that they have to do to move forward, and I know some of them are doing it because they're not waiting for permission. They're going to do what they know they need to do because we have some outstanding school-based leaders. But they're talking to each teacher to ascertain if they're going to come back to the classroom, and if so, under what conditions, right? Like, what are the things that they feel need to be in place for them to say, yes, I'll come back to the classroom. And then we need to ask the same question, school by school, of the parents, because we need to count the space in the school. We need to count the teachers. We need to count the students. Otherwise, we're just talking. We cannot bring this plane in for a landing until we have those numbers, right? And so, it's like, just do the math. Can we do the math? And okay, I'm done right now, but I'm just saying, we just need to focus and move. But again, I hope we had no intention of deciding based upon the parent survey. That input is terrifically important. But we are leaders, and we should know how to take all of these factors and make the decision. That's what we were elected to do. Thank you.
Dr. Robinson, I agree with you. I've had conversations for the last couple of weeks with the superintendent, and I've urged that the administration, as soon as possible, poll the teachers, because we can make the best plans on earth, but if we, out of 13,000 teachers, if 5,000 of them tell us they're not coming back, then we're at a standstill. And the same with the parents. I mean, we have to have enough teachers to teach the kids that are coming, and so we need to poll the parents and find out if they're comfortable sending their kids back. And we need to do the same with the teachers, because otherwise we can do all the planning we want, but it doesn't make any difference whatsoever. The other major concern I have is whatever plans we have, we need to make sure the governor and the commissioner of education are on line with this, because if they're going to penalize us and say, we have kids at home, we're not going to give you the FTE money, we're not paying you for that. I mean, this governor said he wants fully 100% open schools. So, I mean, I don't know what that means. Is he going to allow us to teach children at home? What's he going to say to parents that say, I'm not sending my kids back, and we're ready to teach those kids while they're home, and he's going to tell us what, that we're not following the law, and he's not going to give us a waiver for those children that are home. And if we try to come up with a hybrid plan where the kids are in school, 1 day a week or 2 days a week or every other week, he may say we're not meeting the requirements of 180 days in school. So what's he going to do? Cut our FTE money, or tell us that doesn't meet our obligations as a school board? So we need to make sure, and I know that the superintendent and I spoke today, I know that that those overtures have been made to the governor and to the commissioner by the district and other districts about exactly what will you allow us to do based on what our parents want to do, and we need answers to those questions immediately, because again, that totally changes what we can do and what we can't do if the governor says we just can't do it. Mrs. Andrews, you were next, and then I saw Ms. Brill.
Yes, I want to thank Justin Katz for sending us the survey, which was the instructional policies for live instruction of VI distance learning. That was very helpful to hear what the teachers had to say. And that partnership right now with the union, as well as the teachers union and the other unions now, they have that direct contact. Now, I know you have the task force. I don't know all the people on your task force, and I know that the superintendent is working with the BDB and the Economic Council and those entities, which is very good. But I think we are going to have to make sure that we have some connection with some of these communities, i.e. like your Tri-Cities education. I don't know if we're reaching out. I know you say the region superintendents, but they go home at night. When you start thinking about people in a neighborhood, you can get a computer and go knock on somebody's door. You need to be very familiar with the neighborhood. So I don't know if we have key stakeholders from these different communities that's actually on the ground every day, helping us as a school board to know what the thought processes are. And if we don't have those kinds of people connected to the task force, that needs to be done as soon as possible, because you could be missing some great information that can help us with success for the children, because they do live in their communities, and those leaders in the communities are on the ground every single day. I was in the Glades just last week and working with all the community leaders. So they're on the ground and they're saying, we don't know anything about your task force. And how can we actually give input? They're the ones that said the survey was too long for some of the people. So we need to make sure that we utilize our community leaders, especially in our areas that are real critical and we know where they are, to make sure they can help. That's why I mentioned HECT earlier. Thank you.
Ms. Brill.
Thank you. And so much of my concerns are aligned with yours, Mr. Barbieri. One of the things that when we do poll with the teachers, when we get to that point, I want to make sure that we can capture and accommodate those teachers who are in high-risk groups themselves, are caregivers to elderly people or children who are compromised. I'm very concerned. I realize that we are going to have multiple tracks, but I also want to make sure that, for those that are doing the distance and virtual, that we really give priority to our senior workforce and those that do have, the health issues. So I know there's no easy answer. I believe the governor will accommodate whatever we choose. However, what you said, Mr. Barbieri, is very true. He might turn around and say, no, you do have to have X number of schools or a certain percentage back in the classroom. And I just don't know how we get there until we really know what our workforce looks like, to see who is able to come back. We may not be able to open up. There may not be enough teachers to open up. And then the other thing is, well, I guess we can talk about it when we get to the staff. I'll pass on the rest of my comments.
Speaking of staff, Mr. Superintendent, I guess we should move on. Mr. Hutchins can give us that survey results on the staff. Yes?
Yes, sir. That's the pleasure of the board. Yes, we will move forward.
All right. I'm going to share my screen again. So just to kind of close out the parent piece, and just to address some of the comments, I know the work the regionals are doing, because we've spoken about it, is really going to be focused on both from the school level, student and teacher identification, in terms of trying to nail down what y'all were just talking about in terms of, who's going to be back and when. So I think that group that the regionals are working through is going to work it out on that front in terms of those tools. Moving to staff, we launched on the 16th. We only left staff open for about a week, but again, asked very similar content. Whether they were in favor of reopening full time, telecommuting instead of distance learning, or a blended model. And again, the factors that influence their preferences, the proposed changes for this coming school year. We collected over 16,000 responses. We did this confidentially, not anonymously, like we did the parent survey. The decision on the parent survey to do anonymous was around trying to reduce as many barriers to getting parents able to complete, and by including student ID, that can be a barrier for some parents. So we chose to go anonymous with the parents, but with the employees, because of the way we can collect the data through the staff portal relatively easily. We did collect information so that we could actually pinpoint down to work location, but still maintain the confidentiality of their responses. To Dr. Robinson's point, this is a survey, so people should be able to answer freely. Looking at our participation, as I said, over 16,000 respondents, 16,434, so roughly 58% of our workforce. In the top center, when you break that down by region, pretty similar across the instructional areas, Central through Glades. Other here represents alternative centers or other school work sites that aren't district office. And then district is the staff working in a district department. So as you can see, nearly 2/3 of our school-based personnel responded. Roughly a little less than 50% of our other kind of school-facing staff responded, but only 36% of our district staff. not district overall, but district departmental staff. When you look by instructional level, about 2/3 elementary and middle school staff, a little lower on high school at 63, and 58% of the staff from those other locations when you break it down. To the bottom left, we did choose to do this survey in multiple languages, even though it was staff, but 96% of respondents chose to complete the English version, 3% completing the Spanish version, and the Haitian Creole version, much smaller proportion. We also asked the respondents to self-identify their work location. As you can see from the bottom here, roughly 64% of respondents they identified their work location as a classroom. So we've got primarily classroom staff from the schools responding to the survey. Other here, just to give a caveat because it came up in conversation, there was the staff was able to add in an other and then self-identify. Some people identified that they drive all over the county or they work all over the school, and so those all got classified under other. We asked whether they were working in private offices, cubicles, front office. Roughly 5% of our respondents worked in either a school or district office reception area. We asked about staff working on bus or train, being drivers or attendants, and then split out gym and PE field because obviously that's a slightly bigger space than a classroom. However, for a lot of the responses, because you see the relatively low numbers on some of these, to maintain confidentiality, we sometimes collapsed the work locations. So looking similar to what we did for the parents at the different reopening models, 66% of respondents reported that they would support full reopening, 73% blended, and 82% telecommuting as you go from left to right. One thing that the big takeaway here is the folks who can't do their job remotely, primarily, a bus or train attendant, cafeteria staff, that they tended to be much more likely to support, blended support full return over blended or telecommuting. This again, similar to the parents, we looked at the support for multiple models, and again, similarly, several of the respondents were in favor of or could support, multiple models, either full return or blended at 56%, blended or telecommuting at 66%, and then 51% supporting all three models, being able to support all three models. So looking at the physical return to work while adhering to guidelines, 40% were highly likely to support that, 27% were likely. But again, when you break down by region, similar to the parents' responses, only 59% of the Glades staff reported that they were likely to be able to report to work full time, whereas it was over 63 to 68% for the other regions or district operated facilities. Then the other thing we did, one of the questions we asked a little later in the survey was whether or not the individual had someone, whether they found it important if there was somebody at home, either themselves or somebody else at home, who were in a high risk category, similar to what we asked for the parents. But because of the staff, we broke it down by that group going throughout if there was a difference. So as you can see here, those that found having someone in high risk at home important, only 52% were likely to support, either support or highly support full return, whereas if they didn't find risk at home to be important, it was upwards of 86%. Now looking to the bottom, the question around telecommuting, 82% were either likely or highly likely to support telecommuting. And again, across the different ways we slice this data, telecommuting was was pretty consistent in terms of its support and non-support. Moving into the last question around blended, 45% were highly likely and another 29% likely overall. But when you break down by the regions and those with risk at home, there is differentiation again, with the Glades having less support for a blended model than the other regions, and the folks with risk at home also showing being less likely to return in that blended environment, with 69% indicating they would likely return in a blended environment where there is risk at home versus 81% where there's not. Moving into the factors that influence the COVID-19 vaccine availability, 43% of respondents indicated that that was an important factor to them. 58% reported it was important if they could work from home in terms of making their decision, which would make sense. Enhanced cleaning, 88% identified that as important to their decision making. Interestingly, only 32% reported that childcare was important to their decision making. Limited to the left and towards the bottom there. Limited seating, again, paralleling the parent survey. Maintaining social distance, 73% found that important. And then 56% identified either themselves or someone else in their home being belonging to a high-risk group being an important component to their decision, versus 36% respondents who didn't find that important, and 8 who were unsure. There was a similar question about the need for district-operated childcare, and 16% of respondents indicated they did need some kind of before or after care to return to work, whereas 78% did not. So the key takeaways here is, again, similar to the parents. Glades region is more sensitive to the risk in terms of how they're responding to the survey. As one would expect, the high-risk individuals from a high-risk household that may or may not include themselves in terms of that risk generally found things to be more important. The exception here is with 3F, which was the supervision question, and 5A, which was the childcare questions. That was pretty consistent across most of the respondents in terms of, childcare was either an issue or it wasn't. There wasn't a lot of variability by respondent in that context. But breaking out the risk at home, less than 60% of the respondents across central region, north, south, other schools, or the district offices indicated, high risk at home to be an important factor in their decision, whereas it's 68% for the Glades region. So again, we're kind of seeing the risk in the Glades being more of a important factor in terms of their decision making, in terms of the folks who responded to the survey. Moving on, looking at factors with the reopening preference. 80% of the respondents indicated that they could do their work remotely. 35% indicated they could support returning to what would be essentially a normal schedule, 35% being able to support that, 39% not. Reporting to work all days but in part-time shifts, 50% of the staff respondents could support that, whereas 29% were opposed or did not support. Alternating days of the week, again, paralleling questions from the parents, 62% supported, whereas 21% did not support. Alternating weeks, about a little less than 50% indicated they could support that, 31% did not. And then the final question here for delayed start of school. Let me move this so I can see it. So nearly 60% of respondents indicated that they supported, staff respondents indicated they supported a delay to the start of school. 20% indicated they did not, whereas 21% were unsure what their thoughts were. So again, staff with high-risk individuals in their household indicated less support in general for returning to work all days of the week or alternating days, and more staff with risks supported delaying the start of school beyond the 10th. So again, with all the other factors, these were pretty similar responses, but risk definitely changed their interpretation here, influenced their interpretation here. Ability to work, access to working from home. 73% of the respondents indicated that flexibility with work schedules was important for working from home and telecommuting. 95% indicated they had access to what they needed to do to work remotely. 93% indicated they had no technology challenges. However, 4% did indicate that they had issue with fees associated with, that they might have incurred working remotely. And finally, adequate access to resources and training to complete assignments working remotely. 87% of the staff indicated that yes, they did have adequate access to resources and training for those purposes. Moving more kind of into the targeted piece in terms of the tools, only about 20% of our respondents indicated that they were not comfortable or proficient with the Google suite of tools, which is our primary purpose or our primary toolkit for providing the virtual instruction or the distance instruction. So that's a positive and can be worked to rectify those and reduce those. The gray is individuals who identified it as not applicable to their job. So, small numbers didn't need to deal with those. Some of our other tools, a little bit more esoteric, but still staff's relatively comfortable with them. The Adobe Sign and eCampus are probably the two biggest disparities in the group, but they're also probably the least two used. So again, we'll use these to kind of inform and work with the PD team over the summer where needed. Safety in returning to work. In general, the large majority of respondents, again, both overall and within any of the breakdowns of data, found these things to be very important. The limited number of visitors at one time, restricted public visitation. I'm just going through where there was a lot of support, and I'll come back to the places where it was a little different. Face coverings for employees, face covering for visitors, also very highly favored. Face shields were a little less, necessary. Allowing public visitation as usual. Only 28% of the staff found that important. I think that's telling in terms of there may be some need for public visitation, but not necessarily the norm. Gloves, plexiglass barriers, social distancing, sanitizer, all of these things were very, very important to the staff in terms of responses. The one question around the willingness to download or use a symptom checker app, the 7B down there in the kind of call out box. 80% of respondents indicated yes, they would be willing to. 13% indicated no. There was an other to this question that allowed for written in responses. Some of those were around staff who indicated they would be willing to download an app if it was free, but not if it was pay. And so that kind of, flexibility in that 7%. So just kind of general answers on those. Moving into the bus driver and attendant comfort. So this question, we had 323 respondents indicate they were either a bus driver or a bus attendant. So this item is limited to just those 323. And it was around how comfortable are these folks with students riding school buses if face coverings are worn and hand sanitizer is used. 50% of those respondents indicated they were very comfortable. Another 27%, so 77% of respondents indicated they were comfortable or slightly comfortable with students being on the bus with face coverings and hand sanitizer, whereas the remaining 22% or so indicated they were not comfortable, slightly or very uncomfortable with that. So again, similar to the parent survey, we had some open-ended items around other options for reopening that they would consider that weren't listed, other important factors, or any other information that they wanted to share with the reopening task force. Again, similar to the parent responses, there was pretty similar themes emerging across questions. In this case, only about 4,000 of the staff responded to each of these questions. They did indicate CDC's guidelines should be followed, but they had concerns with the ability to enforce those guidelines. They felt students should wear masks, and that there should definitely be enforcement of social distancing in common areas. Two big concerns that came out were students coming to school sick and limiting the number of in-person staff meetings, either at the school or in the departments. And then finally, I'll stop here. Again, not necessarily read this as a finding slide, but it's a nice summary to wrap it up. And we can go to questions.
Mr. Houchins, I have a question for you. Can you go back to slide 30?
Yes, sir.
So on this slide, it says that apparently delivery instruction through Google Classroom and use of Google Classroom tools seems to be 18 and 17% of those respondents saying that they need more training. Do we know how many of them are teachers?
I'd have to drill into it, but we should be able to do that, yes.
I think that's important, Mr. Superintendent, that if we have teachers that are telling us they need additional training, we identify those teachers as soon as possible and start them on the training schedule. I know we're planning on giving the teachers some additional training anyway before the kids eventually come back to school one way or the other, but here we have teachers that are already telling us that they need additional training, so we should get to them.
The Deputy Superintendent and the CAO, Glenda Sheffield, will definitely be able to speak to this. We also realize that training also needs to exist for principals and assistant principals as well. They've already told me that, so we're well aware, Mr. Barbier, and they are working on that training.
Yeah, thank you. And Mr. Houchins, can you go to slide 31 before I call on the other board members? So on this one, I just have a question. It says employer-provided face coverings or face shields, 19%. Are those 19% saying that they don't want employer-provided face coverings? They have their own, or are they telling us that if we give them to them, they're not going to wear them?
They're just saying that wasn't an important factor in their return to work safety decision making.
Okay, I wasn't sure if they were just telling us they weren't going to wear them. Okay.
No, sir. This is all basically around, and some of them that could be what they meant, but this was really just asking, was this an important factor or not in your decision making?
Okay. Thank you. I think I saw Mrs. Andrews, and then who else? Raise a hand here. Go ahead, Mrs. Andrews.
Thank you. I'm hoping that we'll do sort of like what we did for the teachers, because I did have some concerns that I guess some of the people were not too willing to do the survey because they felt like, they had to put their email on it, so it wasn't as confidential. But one of the things I really want to find out is, will the unions actually be doing their own survey? Is this going to be some of this that we're talking about from this survey, negotiated issues as it relates to the different unions, the CTA, the SEIU? Will they actually be a part of all of these pieces? Now, this data is old data as we've spiked over the last week. So, people may have said one thing a week ago, and they're really thinking something totally different now. So I'm worried that some of this that we're looking at now that sounds positive might not be positive anymore, since we're at a different place in Palm Beach County and the state of Florida. And I worry about whether some of this stuff will have to be negotiated with the different unions before we can get into it. So I do know when a lot of districts did distance learning at the front end, when we started, there were unions working with that process. We had a wonderful Classroom Teachers Association, and we worked hand in hand, and it didn't have to be negotiated. But as we move to this new level here, there may need to be that. So I don't know. I'm not at the table, Dr. Fenoy. Will some of these things that we're talking about here have to be negotiated?
The answer is yes. the CTA union meet with me every week. They meet with the deputy superintendent every week and the CAO. SEIU union, they are also, we have a task force with them, and so we're meeting with them regularly. I also had scheduled meetings with some of the other groups, so we are in communication with them. The official bargaining process, I think, is going to begin next week. I'm pretty sure the bargaining team is already at the table, because when I talked to CTA yesterday, they told me that those meetings were coming up. So all of those areas that you had concerns around, we are covered on them right now.
And just to follow up, Mr. Bobbier, because the teachers are concerned. I mean, the bus drivers, the maintenance people, all of them are concerned. And they're saying that, guess what? We're in a new day now with the spike, and we haven't really had a chance to voice. So hopefully, Mr. Superintendent, that we'll have a way to get some more information for them now that we're in another reality as being critical, very critical.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, any other questions from the board members? Dr. Robinson, and then Mr. Shaw.
Thank you. So just a couple of questions. The first question is, did the survey go to non-union members as well as union members?
This survey went to all staff.
Okay. All right. And then I just want to say, I like the question on the survey. Where was it? The return to work safely, with all the questions about the different variables to be considered. And I really like, because it does show that it confirms for me that the teachers know and staff knows that we need to have multi-layered protections whenever we do open school. The only other thing I would like to add is, as we're pointing out the need for staff to have some additional time, like I call it playing with the software, that we also need to provide training for students and parents in using Google Classrooms and whichever other programs, and that needs to be provided hopefully in the community, but definitely provided. We should not assume that all these students and parents are just, proficient with the software that we're going to use. Thank you.
Mr. Shaw, and then Mrs. Andrews.
Thank you. My question is for the superintendent, because when we look at this whole issue of all of the survey questions and answers and the variety of responses, every decision we make has a different kind of impact on different employees. For example, if we are doing strictly remote instruction, we now have a problem for bus drivers and the maintenance and cafeteria and everything. I think, and Dr. Fenoy, at what point in time would it be appropriate for us to have an executive session, if we can, and Ms. Rico, you might want to jump in on this one, to deal with some of those issues? Because, one, and this is certainly not, a recommendation or anything, but an issue we have is, if we have people that really literally do not have a function in the district, do we have an option to pay them? Would the law even allow us to do those kinds of things? So I think there's some very complicated issues that fall into us assessing and evaluating all of these different options. So at what point in time can we have discussions to try to resolve some of those things?
Yes, sir. First of all, let me just respond to Dr. Robinson's comment around training for students and parents. We have designed, the leadership development team has done some of that work for parent onboarding into distance learning. But the kid one, I need to follow up on that. So let me get with the academic team on that. Mr. Shaw, I am very hesitant to talk specifics about that right now. Right. Mr. Burke and I, and really all of my direct reports, this is an ongoing conversation as part of our decision-making matrix. We are in communication with Tallahassee around looking at waivers. I've been having weekly calls with my two neighbors to the south, Robert Russi and Alberto Cavallo, and that conversation has come up. So what I would like to do is give us more time to kind of sort through this. And then I do believe it needs to be a sort of a closed door session. So we got to work with Julianne on how we can do that with the board, because you're right, it is very complicated, but we're trying to find ways to work around those things, but we also have to remember at some point we're going to be audited. So we got to really, there's a lot of decisions and things that we have to do. But I completely understand the question.
Show you a follow-up.
Just a quick follow-up, and I think that I appreciate that because I really expected that to be the answer. But I think it also reinforces that any decision we make is really dependent on getting some of those answers as we go through this process. So thank you very much, because I think it is something that we've got to take a critical look at. One other thing. This was a conversation earlier, but related to the issue of devices and training. And yesterday, the Executive Committee of the Issues Forum, which is the Intergovernmental Coordinating Council of the county, had an Executive Committee meeting, and Chris Garrison and Mark Howard were on that, presented the request for the district for us to address the issue of connectivity countywide. And on July 30th, there will be an issues forum to try to get a coordinated effort on the part of the cities and the county and the school district for that access. So hopefully that will work. Thank you.
All right, any other board members have questions? Mrs. Andrews, go ahead.
Thank you. Whenever we get to this point, testing is going to be a big issue. You know, we're the largest employer in Palm Beach County. And when we get to the part of talking about bringing back bus drivers, teachers, everybody that's going to be working with our children, we need to be thinking now as to how we will actually be able to do, you know, testing, contact tracing, and so on and so on. Has there been any thought process about that at all?
Yes, ma'am. Ms. Paul and the operations team, along with Paul Houchins, we are reaching out to the county. Also, I think I mentioned it to maybe board members yesterday, but I think the Dr. Alonzo in the health department, we're going to be reaching out to them to see if there are mobile units. Obviously, legal's involved in this, but it is on our list of things to consider. We are going to reach out to the county because obviously they provide that testing. The bigger question for us, or what I don't know today, is do we pay for it? Where will we get the money? And so we're going to start with the resources that are available to us and keep working on that. Yes, ma'am.
Dr. Robinson, go ahead.
So if you will indulge me, I wrote a speech because I am frustrated. So let me just say, so on Tuesday night, I think it was Tuesday night, I held a Zoom meeting that within 60 seconds of opening the meeting, my Zoom account was maxed out and I had to upgrade it. So I truly appreciate the 150 or more people that spent time with me virtually while I was wringing my hands and sharing the multiple things that had to be considered when deciding the school reopening decisions. So I'm very concerned, as you know, about this pandemic and the impact that school reopening will have. And I say will have. We know that when school reopens, there will be an increase in the SARS-CoV-2 infections. How large it will be up to us. I want to say once again that I know that we cannot get the risk down to zero, but we will need to work to get it down as much as possible. We have all read about the disproportionate toll that this pandemic is having on Black bodies. And in the age where everybody is acknowledging the Black Lives Matter, how we open school tells us that the Palm Beach County School District believes that. So now let me be very clear. I'm concerned about the children, but not just the children. We know that the risk of death is lower in children. We know that when children get infected, they have less severe symptoms as a general rule. But Palm Beach County has had 3,473 young people under the age of 18 tested, and 24.9% of them are positive. That's a high positivity rate. What we don't know now is whether or not there will be any lingering effects on children who get infected with the virus. I'm going to hope not. But the new thing is that Scripps has documented a mutation in this virus that increases the infectivity. We don't know if that means that more children will become infected. But even if more children don't get infected, our children do not live on a children-only island. Children live with adults. I pray that they have numerous caring adults in their lives. Some of those caring adults are elderly or have underlying disease. Some of them are their favorite teacher, that they will hug no matter how much social distancing we insist upon. Some of those adults are custodians, the food service workers and bus drivers that will be greeted with huge smiles on the children's faces and the attempt for the child to high-five them like they did last year. Some of those adults are their parents, their aunts, their uncles, their grandparents. Some of those adults are their neighbors, you know, the ones that come over and shook the child's hand when they had on their little miniature cap and gown from their pre-K graduation. Some of those adults recognize them and hand them a free cookie at the grocery store. Some of them are faith leaders, boys and girl club directors, tutors, swim team coaches. And guess what? Adults are valuable too. So we must do everything that we can to reduce the risk of infection in children so that they do not, and we do not, contribute to the mortality and morbidity of children or adults. Now, I want to continue to believe that the ideal situation would be to open school as normal. But that's magical thinking. We're in a spike. Everybody has said so. So like now you believe me, I hope, right? So I understand that everyone has been inundated with conflicting information. Some people with good looking credentials say things that are not born in science, epidemiology, or even good common sense. You can find a so-called study to confirm almost anything you want. And as my professor at Michigan State, Dr. Patricia Julius, taught me, quote, to be published, you need not be right nor sane. So I will do my best to make sure that this leadership team knows the science, what the public health experts recommend when they can be free to speak. I will continue to send sound medical articles that are not too filled with medical jargon to the board and leadership team. I would be happy to review and discuss any study that you want. And I won't get into some of the studies that have been quoted, but I'd be happy to. So I just want you to see what I see. We can save lives or we can kill people with our decisions. Now that's always been the case because the educational system can either blossom someone's life or cause a slow, painful death by not educating them. But now I'm talking about illness or death that could happen in a relatively short time if we make the wrong decisions. I've seen too many so-called leaders that ignore public health recommendations in favor of politics, favor, applause, or what just seems easy. And I can promise you I will not accept that in the Palm Beach County School District. So health and safety first. So I also want to be clear that when I say school, as in our last meeting, I mean in the school building. The teacher in the classroom in front of the children is what I call school. We cannot have school on August 10th. No way, it's not safe. So I stand with CTA saying that we should start the formal learning process again via distance learning. I trust that we have learned to do it better. We have talked about our efforts and the efforts of community partners to make sure that our students have their devices and internet access. And one day I hope that we'll be able to return to real school, but I don't see it in the near future. So right now we're in this thing that I call the paralysis in the analysis. But students, teachers, parents, and community need to plan. So I am raising my hand to ask the superintendent to make the call as soon as possible. I'm asking that you make the call to start distance learning on August 10th while we make detailed plans on how we can reopen schools safely when the community viral load decreases. There are measures that families and communities need to take in preparation for returning to distance learning, just as they would have to make preparations to return to any form of schooling. Community partners are working to address the issues as previously mentioned, and we must work together to make sure that we address the equity issues related to distance learning. But we must make sure that all of our school-based and community-based social-emotional support systems are reaching out to students and families. So again, we cannot govern by applause. We must lead with our hearts and with information. As we say in medicine, we need to make the decision with, quote, an abundance of caution. So I am raising my hand, standing with CTA to say we need to start distance learning on August 10th. We need to work that out and then separately work out the plans to return to school when the viral load allows us to do so safely, right? And distance learning should remain an option for everyone at any point in time, even when we return to real school in whatever form. So we have challenges to work out. We need to get started. And I'm ready. I want to make the call. I'm tired of this talk. It is time to make the call, put it on the record. We're starting with distance learning, August 10th, so people can plan. Thank you.
Mrs. McQuinn, then Mrs. Andrews.
Yes, I don't expect an answer this evening, but by next Wednesday, that should be able to happen. We've all received some emails from teachers who are clearly very conscientious. And in the event that the question has been in the event that they cannot, that students don't return warm bodies to campuses, they have expressed the interest in working from their classrooms for remote learning. So that's one question that I know they're going to want an answer to. And a couple of principals have already texted tonight. I want the teachers to be able to teach from their classrooms. So number one, is that going to be possible? And I think all of that social distancing, you know, I go so far as to think, okay, in a high school, how do they all get to a restroom? But I know people can figure all that out. So that is one question in terms of, can the teachers work from their classrooms because they feel more comfortable that they have all of the access that they need. And the other one was, I can't remember, I'll raise my hand again.
Mrs. Andrews.
Thank you, Dr. Robinson. I can raise my hand today to say that I agree with CTA because I'm looking at this 135-page document from Broward. And I've been looking at documents from all across the United States, sitting on the Council of Great City Schools, of all of these districts trying to put frameworks together. There's so many different scenarios that the board will have to consider if we talk about the blended model. You've got to really get to your parents and let them know so many different scenarios. I was happy to see the two discussion items today. Because, I mean, we have a meeting next week and then we're on the 15th and then it's time to go back to school. We aren't really ready. We've got so many plans. We've got to work with the union. We've got all kinds of issues. Certainly the health issue is the number one issue, and August 10th is right around the corner. I don't want to jump out there to say we're going to do all these things and not really have the input from the necessary stakeholders so that we can make sure that people are safe. So I'm willing to say teachers are the first priority, the front line of whatever happens within our schools. And I do listen closely with what they're saying here. But I just know it's got a lot of work to be done from the school district, the task force. I've not seen them present to me frameworks of how they would even do this blended model yet and how it's going to impact who will come to school, when, how, what grade levels, whether you start with K2 or K3 and only the middle schools will stay home and do. It's a lot of work when I read through all of these different proposals coming from these different districts. It's going to take us a lot of meetings, school board members, to kind of talk about that framework, to be ready to say we're ready to do business. And I know we're not going to go back to the old normal. It's definitely going to be a new normal. But right now, we need to just get it right by making sure parents and the community know we're going to stand still right now and go back to the distance learning and prepare and be ready. So I don't know when the new date will be, but we got a lot of work to do here in Palm Beach County to know exactly the kinds of pieces of the puzzle that's going to make it safe for children as well as adults.
Ms. Brill.
Thank you. And so I did speak to Dr. Fenoy. I mentioned very briefly what Mrs. McQuinn had mentioned, that, you know, there were some teachers that did want to do their distance learning from the classroom. But then again, there are some teachers that really can't go back to the building itself to do that. So I still feel that August 10th is premature. I think that we could start fine-tuning the distance piece, the virtual piece on August 10th, with the training of the parents and the teachers. I don't know that I'm not committed to saying that we're not going to open up at all, because I do think we may have to have different tracks for certain, you know, but right now it isn't safe for us to move forward August 10th. I have said before, you all know this, you're probably sick of hearing me say this the past 10 years, that I'd like us to align with the rest of the states anyway on the Eastern Coast. So after Labor Day makes sense for that reason itself, and then ending the school year into June. But I just, I think that we really need to know if we are going to have some buildings that are open, who is going to come back, what teachers feel comfortable coming back. And then we need to know who can't come back. But I am not comfortable with August 10th at this juncture.
Dr. Robinson.
Okay, so nobody else wanted to talk. So this is the point. It's clear as day. So we need to start with distance learning, right? And then at some point in time, hopefully this semester, I pray sometime this semester, that the viral load will decrease enough that we can start having what I call school in the school building, but with the multi-layer precautions. That, in my opinion, will require a hybrid model. All the different variations on the hybrid, yes, Mrs. Andrews is quite right. We have to decide which variation we're going to do. Maybe some of the variations will be school-based. We don't need to tackle that at this moment, right? But what we do need to understand is that there's 3 phases. There's distance, there's hybrid, and hopefully soon, in the foreseeable future, we will have, quote, regular school. But all that depends on what's going on with the viral load in the community, right? We cannot put children or adults, whether they're our employees or our community members, at unnecessary risk. I want the children to go back to school. I don't like distance learning. I think large numbers of children who are already falling behind do not engage well with distance learning. We have learned a lot of lessons with this about face we had to do at the end of March. I think we would do it better this time. But the point is that we need to make the call so that the teachers and the school-based leaders can get ready to do distance learning right, hopefully on August 10th. And then whenever the viral load says so, then we can go back into the school building. I'll be saying glory, hallelujah. But let's just be clear. This has to be based on science and health and not applause. We cannot, everybody's input is fabulous, right? But we are the people who are supposed to be making these decisions, these tough decisions. And this is a 100-year tough decision, right? So it's time for us to step up and lead.
I got several board members who want to speak, but I just want to make a comment. I too don't agree that we can probably start on the 10th, because whether we start with classrooms, brick and mortar classrooms, or distance learning, I do disagree that we're not giving parents the option if they want to send their children back. And Dr. Robbins, I agree with you on one. We need to base it on science. The problem is I don't see science coming together on this. Science is politicized like everything else in this country. It depends on which side of the aisle you sit on, whether it's the doctors are saying it's okay or they're not saying okay. And I don't expect you to interpret the experts for me. I don't expect you to do that. I want to be able to understand when I make a decision that I'm making it based on science and medicine rather than politics. And there's all these studies out there. One study says it's fine to send kids back with masks and put them distance learning. Separate them so that they're far enough apart from each other. And other studies say don't send them back. I don't think we can do a survey with the parents in this community that absolutely, we see the emails. These parents, some of them are willing to send their kids back. It's up to us to figure out a way to do that as safely as we can. It's ridiculous that we take the position that after all these surveys, we're going to ignore everybody and we're just going to send the kids to distance learning, and this board should make that decision. I don't agree with that. The superintendent's got task forces that are supposed to report to him, and he'll report to us. He's got to make a recommendation to us on July 15th. I think that when we make a decision on July 15th, I don't think we're going to be ready to open the schools full-time on the 10th. I think there's going to have to be some training, additional training and such. But, I'm just concerned when people keep saying that we have to listen to science and medicine when science and medicine is politicized like everything else in this country. You can't get a clear understanding of who's behind what. is the American Association of Pediatrics, are they a group of people that are now politicized because they follow a certain line in this country or not? That's my concerns. I know you want to speak again, Dr. Robinson, but I got other board members first. Mrs. McQuinn, you go first.
Thank you, because we reminded me what my second question was. And since other people are just throwing it out there, if I had to decide, now and I saw Dr. Robinson nodding about teachers working from their classrooms. And I know that we have the issue of, will teachers have the option? Don't want to discuss that right now. That's totally with Mr. Katz to work with the superintendent, et cetera. But I do believe, and I do believe that our teachers can come back August 3rd. If they want to, I'm not going to say where they're coming, if it's virtually or if it is in the school building. But I think they can. And every teacher that we have heard from, at least all of us online, they say, I've learned so much that I didn't know before. And I think we've all agreed that some principals have done a better job than others at monitoring what teachers are doing. And Dr. Fenoy has said, we're going to have district guidelines for what teachers do and for how teachers are supervised. And so I don't know what that looks like. That's not my job to do that. And so probably disagreeing with many of you, I know that teachers have not been sitting back and just saying, oh, let me open my eyes August 3rd and school might be starting. They've been thinking about this. And so for me, we could start I'm going to tell you, any principal that I talk to right now says, I can have distance learning ready to go August 10th. And I'm just telling you what they said to me now, because I'm saying to them, well, why can't you have kids August 10th? And they said, have you lost your mind? If we cannot get, I'm talking secondary now, we can't get a master schedule if I don't know who my kids are until at least July 15th. I'm talking about maybe in campus, I can't have a master schedule ready. And that's true, because I don't even know who the teachers are by subject matter who are coming back. So of course I'm talking secondary, but they feel that they could start after Labor Day. So I'm agreeing with whoever I heard earlier. Let's get a definite date out there and let parents plan for their kids, and teachers plan their lives, but I mean, at least they're employees. Let's let parents plan. And then of course, if situations change, then we have to, as Dr. Fenoy said, I love the green light, red light. We have to be ready. Thank you.
Mrs. Andrews, then Mrs. Whitfield.
And thank you. And one of the things I just want to tell you is that whatever we do, you got three options here. You're surely not going back the regular way. It's going to be a new normal, blended or distance. But you need to have each plan in front of you so that you will know the pros and cons for each one of these issues that you may undertake. We know how to do distance learning. We've done it. We want to do it better. We certainly want to streamline it to make sure that more children are getting the education that they need to get. But I'm sitting here saying that I've not seen anything come to me in my hands to show me the frameworks of what it would look like for Palm Beach County School if we did a blended model or a hybrid. I don't know what that would look like based on what's been recommended to me by the task force as a board member who would make a decision. And even when we talk about the distance learning itself, and how we would do it for the year. We need more information on what that's going to look like, the professional development, what the unions are doing, and so on. We haven't seen any of those models. When you look at most big urban districts, they have all three models out there. There's been some discussion with the community, the stakeholders, about what it looks like if you go with opening to a blended or hybrid. What it would look like if you're going to just go straight distancing again, and how you work through the buses, the cafeteria, the PPEs, all of that stuff has to be laid out, how much it's going to cost, the financial impact. As a board member, I haven't had any discussions on what it would look like operationally if we went in a hybrid mode. So right now, we're talking about a few more weeks and we'll be into August 10th. So we need to get the information in front of us so that we can be educated by the task force, what they're saying, so that we can have input. And then we need to make sure we get input from stakeholders before we move further. We know how to do the distance learning based on what we did last year, and we can modify that and make it better. But we can begin to fine tune that too as we try to work through what could happen maybe in October or November or January, because we will have these tracks in place with the information needed to move forward. Safety, health and safety, number one. But right now, as Palm Beach County, and I'm looking at us, we haven't had those discussions yet. And I've seen those discussions with others, but I haven't seen us have those discussions of how it would look like if we went with a blended for August or September. And it's not something you can just throw together. Lots of discussion and lots of input from stakeholders.
So before I call on Mrs. Andrews, I think Mrs. Whitfield was next, and Mrs. Brill, and Dr. Robinson. You know, we do have a schedule in front of us that the superintendent told us about a couple weeks ago. You know, next week is another workshop to kind of give us all the information we need. And then the superintendent has told us he's going to make a recommendation to us on July 15th. Now, maybe that recommendation that comes to us on July 15th doesn't give us enough time if we approve the recommendation that he makes to start the process on the 10th. But he has outlined for us what the plans are. And when we all know that he's not got all of his information from the task force yet, that he's putting it all together, and he's going to bring that to us next week, and then we're going to be asked to make a decision. I understand he's also scheduled one-on-ones with each one of us for an hour with him and his staff to bring us all the information over the next week or so that he's acquired from his two task forces. So, I mean, we just got to give him a little time. I mean, things change daily around here. You expect to make a decision without the information, but yet the information keeps constantly changing. We have to work through the process, give the superintendent time to bring us all the information that he's gathered. He'll make a recommendation on the 15th. If on that day we decide that we like his plan, but it's too late in the summer to start it on the 10th, and we'll make a decision that we want to postpone. I agree. I don't think we can make a decision on the 15th and get everything started on the 10th. He and I have already discussed that. I believe that he's already thinking about proposing to us to move the start of the school year a little later, a week or two later than what we had originally planned. But we just need to give the superintendent and the administration time to get back to us. I mean, look what Broward did. I mean, they came out with recommendations and they backed off on everything because they were too quick to get everything out there. And now they're retreading, trying to figure out how they're going to retread that to come back out to the public. So we just need to be patient. I know that we all want to get a decision made. Things change daily. But Mrs. Whitfield, you were next, then Mrs. Brill, then Dr. Robinson, then I saw Mrs. Andrews.
Well, Mr. Barbieri, you took everything I was going to say. One of the things that I think makes me very uncomfortable about rushing this decision is that we've watched so many districts around the state who rushed through it and came back with a plan that they're now having to backtrack on. And I don't want to do that for our families. I want to give them an answer and have that be the answer. And I'd like the superintendent to follow his plan, the one he has put forward to us. I think, we know what's going to happen over the next 2 weeks. I think we can be patient to make sure that we get the right answer. And also, I'd like to see how the numbers change over the next 2 weeks. This last week has been a big impact on my thinking, watching the numbers get worse. So I've been, I would like to give them a little bit more time to watch how this proceeds. When I talked to him, he said he needs 5 weeks to open schools. And so that still gives him time. And on July 15th, if we can come up with a plan on that day. So, I'm very comfortable with where things sit right now. And I'd like to get to the point where in a week we have those really detailed discussions. And then in 2 weeks, we have a decision. Thank you.
Mr. Superintendent.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is that, so I have seen the task force sort of culminating activities. We actually ran through it this morning, which is why, yesterday, which is why we did schedule for every board member to have one-on-one time Monday and Tuesday of next week so that you are prepared for the conversation on the 8th. And the 15th is the decision. So, and I think, so I want to make sure that you're educated so we can have a more educated conversation on the 8th based on everything that we've collected, all the surveys, feedback from the principals, everything. And so I appreciate it. We have it set up on a timeline for a very specific reason, to make sure that we have the most accurate information at the time the decision is made. As Ms. Whitfield said, I felt that the team is strong enough to get whatever the plan is done in 5 weeks. You know, when you talk about the distance learning improvement, we've been working on that since the beginning. That was the first charge I gave Dr. Sheffield almost 4 months ago. So that work is still continuing, and I've said it in the paper, I'm saying it to you. No matter what we do, the distance learning program will not go away and must be improved. So I don't want you even worrying about that part no more. We have that train. That decision has been made. The other decision that has been made is that we are not going back to school as we did when we canceled it. So really all I need to get you up to speed on is the different varieties of the blended learning model, and then we will do that next week. We will also, but then there's other variables too, the special ed population, all of our kids who need intubations and feedings, so we got a team working on surveying those communities to see if that's a possibility. The reason I don't want to commit to anything, because as you've all stated, information is coming at us every hour. And so I think this timeline, and then now actually pushing things more to the school side, because as my governance team, which is you and I, make the big decisions, the schools have to make the end of trenches decisions. And so they are already started doing their social distancing, and I have the chief of police and I have operations, they're going to be helping with that. So as I said in my opening comments, there's a lot happening behind the scenes. But what I just did not want to do was confuse people by a million different things. And so we need to be slow and deliberate, ladies and gentlemen. And I appreciate the support, but we will get you guys up to speed first on Monday and Tuesday.
Ms. Brill, then Dr. Robinson, then Mrs. Andrews, then Mr. Shaw. Brill, Robinson, Andrews, Shaw.
Thank you. So, Mr. Barbieri, you really said everything that I was looking to say. I will tell all of you that my daughter's here visiting from Sao Paulo, Brazil, talking about going from the frying pan into the fire. But she is serving on the opening task force in her school, and I did send something to staff, and I'll share it with you just at what they're looking at, because as they do look at some of their schools or all of the schools being open, you know, things that we're not even talking about is the facility cleaning, the disinfection, along with the, improving our distance learning. There were so many other factors that come into play, sports, food, eating in the classroom, all of those pieces. But I just really wanted to support the superintendent in coming back to us. I look forward to hearing from the task force. I know that we are going to make that decision by July 15th. And I think Dr. Fenoy may have made a lot of people feel a lot better, knowing that we are going to have a definitive answer, and it may not look like, well, we know it's not going to look like what we planned a year ago. So thank you.
Dr. Robinson, then Mrs. Andrews.
Oh, okay, thank you. So let me just say one thing. First off, science is not politicized, right? The reports are politicized. And that is why, we have a book in my house called Studying the Study and Testing the Test. It's part of a public health and epidemiology training program. So I have been reading way too many damn studies. Here's my studies that I've been reading, or at least this is some of them, right? So let me just start. I'm not going to go through all of them, but let me just tell you this. If you read the American Academy of Pediatrics report, they have not one reference, okay? Not one. Now, in medicine, you don't do that. In medicine, if you want to make a point, you have your supporting documents. I think that we teach our students that, right? Now, I'm not dismissing their opinion. I mean, I have no reason to disrespect or dislike the American Academy of Pediatrics, even though they're the same institution that used to say that children who are teething don't spike fevers. Okay? I'm just saying. But the point is this. Everybody has an opinion. I'm good with that. I also understand that I have a lot more background in understanding this stuff than all of you, except maybe Ms. Whitfield has some background in this. But it's nothing new happening. We're not having surprises. If you will go back on the record, I told you that the age group was going to get younger, right? Yeah, here it is, right? Now, I'm glad this scripts documented the mutations that everybody in medicine expected would happen, right? So, and if you want to talk to some people, in my little diatribe a few moments ago, I made some references to public health officials who can talk to you like off the record, right? So that they're position might not be in jeopardy. We can make those things happen, right? So maybe you get a better understanding of the science behind this. Clearly, we are a board that governs by the majority. I am quite clear in my position. I know what's happening medically. We're not going to change that by another damn survey, right? I'm thinking we need to make the call so that our people can make plans. Whatever we decide is going to change at some point in time, right? Hopefully, it will change from distance to hybrid to regular school, and hopefully it won't flip back, right? But understand, we have to be nimble. But my point is, people want to know what's going on, and they really don't want to wait another 2 weeks because there's a whole lot of planning teachers can do. One of the things that was made clear to me is that there's one way that they're going to plan if they're in distance and another way they're going to plan in hybrid, right? I'm just trying to give people the tools to get going. And if you think that children are better off at home right now than if they were at home or in a community setting doing distance learning, then I think we should have another conversation. Thank you.
Mrs. Andrews, then Mr. Shaw.
Thank you. And it was great to hear Ms. Brill talk about her daughter being on the task force and all the work that has to be done. I just want to correct Mr. Barbieri a bit. Those preliminary discussions, that wasn't their plan in Broward. And the same thing for Miami-Dade. These are frameworks that people have been talking about for weeks as to what it would look like if we went this route or that route. And they were working that with their stakeholders. That's what I hear every Friday when I'm on the Council of Great City Schools meeting. They're talking about their different preliminary discussions, but they've got something to look at based on all the different pieces of the puzzle. I'm happy to know that next week we're going to get some kind of document and hopefully something that's going to tell us about the kinds of things that Ms. Brill just said that her daughter was working through. It's a lot if we're going to talk about a hybrid piece. It's great to hear the superintendent says we got it covered for the distance learning since we did what we did. We still need to refine it because a lot of kids didn't get online or didn't have internet access, and we need professional development for teachers as well as others. So I'm happy to hear that. But the bottom line is I don't fault any district that really went out with those frameworks and preliminary discussions early. We're getting ours finally, and I'm happy for that so that I can explain. But when we get that, we need to have discussions with our stakeholders, not just having a one-on-one with me. Discussions need to be had with the public as to this is what we're looking at and have their input before we make final decisions. So all of that takes a while to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Andrews. Mr. Shaw.
Thank you very much. I have to say that I agree with Dr. Robinson totally that this decision needs to be based upon science because we're letting too many other things drive so much of this conversation. And fortunately, it's not driving where we are right now. I think that I give the superintendent and staff credit. They're looking at the reality of this. I too have a real concern about us going back to school on the 10th because this is such a moving target. And I really hesitate also on any more surveys because I think we could do a survey every single week and get whatever results come in. And next week we'll want another survey. I think we've gotten pretty good direction. And I think the board has, listening to you all have really come together as far as some direction on where we want to go. And I don't want to make a decision today. I believe Dr. Fenoy needs to have this time to sit down, go through this, because what I said earlier about the impact of things we don't know that mean that we need to have a closed session, that's a major issue that needs to be taken into consideration. And I don't want us to make a decision until we have really clearly talked about all of the issues. And it may be simply having Dr. Fenoy go item by item and say, here's the issue and everything. So I like the idea that we slow down, give it until the 15th, have our meetings with the superintendent next week, and then move forward. If we don't, we might make the wrong decision. And then just the things that y'all have said then we go back and we have to redo it. So I would like to avoid that, but I do believe it's got to be science-driven, impact-driven, and what becomes, just good policy. Thanks.
Okay, if there's no other discussion, Mr. Superintendent, do you have anything else for this workshop?
No, sir. I just want to thank the board for their feedback. We are taking everything into consideration. And I'm actually very excited about our work with you next week and getting to that final decision by the 15th. I just want to say this for the record. The principals, the teachers, they are working very hard. They're working very hard to figure this out. And my direct reports, the entire executive cabinet are working hard. And we are hearing you. We're hearing the community. We're reading every email. And so I will be making a recommendation on the 15th. And I will help make sure the board is educated along the way. But I understand that I have to make this recommendation to the board. I understand that fully.
We need a motion to adjourn the workshop so we can start the special meeting. Motion by Mr. Shaw, second by Mrs. Whitfield. Anybody object? Motion carries 7-0. Mrs. Bash.